something I want to kind of talk about is what does data mean to Latino communities? Because I feel like oftentimes everybody just puts it in one big group. They're like, hey, Latinos, they all are like this. Like on any report, demographic report, they put everybody into one group. And I think, for Asian Pacific Islanders, it's dozens and dozens of groups. And it's like, hey, APIs are this. You are healthy. You are, low on chronic diseases. You're, you blah, 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 blah. Like, how does that feel for Latino communities?
The same.
Same?
I think that, especially I was in a convene yesterday, Scott, and there was a conference about immigrants. And I think it was the mayor who said that LA has the face of the world. I thought that was like awesome imagery that he used. And what he was talking about was that our city is super diverse. And in many cases, like a lot of the neighborhoods have like the highest concentration of the specific folk, anywhere except that home from their home country. I know that's the case for Mexicans here in LA and I think Filipinos and other folks. Mm-hmm. But I think that somehow, as like data scientists and even politicians, we don't want to do the work to really understand that. We only say we only use diversity when it suits us and is beneficial for us. But we don't take the extra time to say, hey, it's not just Mexicans that live here. It's folks from Honduras, Guatemala, of course, El Salvador, And then when you hang out with a bunch of Latinos, they're very clear and proud of like, I'm not Mexican. This is where I'm from. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and they were speaking in Spanish, and they used some slang words, and I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, clearly you're not from, I think they were from Guatemala. And I was like, oh shit,
Yeah.
It was like a completely foreign word that I've never heard before, and it was Spanish. It was just like a different, dialect.
I feel that oftentimes people look at Latinos and Asians, and they're like, oh, LA, Chinese and Mexicans, right? That's all it is, but it's just, that doesn't capture the diversity of, like what you just said, of what actually makes LA, right? What have you seen folks do, like within the Latino communities, to kind of like fight back against that?
I feel like there's like this new generation, and our generation of folks that are really trying to embrace the diversity. And I think what I've seen people do is be proud of like their foods, for example. Like I think like LA Taco, which is like this the local newspaper that's actually doing a lot of really cool journalism work as of late. They're putting out like new articles on very specific foods from different that are not from Mexico, and I think that that's cool. They're trying to make Latino food that's not Mexican trendy, even though it's been trendy in these neighborhoods forever.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like one example that comes to mind of folks that are trying to say like, no, it's not just about Mexican food or Mexican people. It's also about all these other folks that make up Latin America.
I think that, to me, that resonates a lot with Asian Pacific Islander communities, because same thing, right? There's so many different foods, so many different cultures. How do we make sure that those voices are heard? Mm-hmm. Maybe we need our own version of LA Taco, or maybe LA Taco, they got to do something with API foods too.
That would be dope.
That'd be dope. Maybe LA Taco would be like LA Bun Me or something.
Yeah.
But like it makes me just think there's so many differences we're talking about. There actually is a commonality in that you can't just group all these different folks together because it's so easy, right? It just seems like that's why folks do it, right? I look at these reports and it's like, 4 lines define everybody, all the races and ethnicities for LA, and that's like bizarre to me, right?
Do you think it's like an extension of like white supremacy?
It is. It absolutely is, right? Like, who are they making it easy for?
In the current construct, when we say, hey, Latinos are more than just Mexicans, it's also these folks, and they all have really proud, rich cultures that are not all the same. There's this feeling of like, well, we can't include them, or we don't have time for that because we have to focus on this other stuff, and it's almost like taking away, but it's not. It's a deficit mentality.
Yeah, because sometimes you say, hey, can you disaggregate this data more? And I feel like often the response is like, well, I don't have resources. What would you have me do? Mm-hmm. Should we just not have it at all? Mm-hmm. Right? I think that's always been thrown back. or it's like, help us figure out a budget to do this, right? So it's always like, you do that work. We haven't built this in, and we don't know how to fix it. You help us, right? And I think for me, oftentimes it's, I've gone out as a nonprofit organization to help try to get more data, get more funding and stuff like that. But that onus has been put on us, right, to help kind of fix their system.
Us being sort of advocates and nonprofits and other folks.
Yeah. I think data is very important. It's very helpful, but it's also very dangerous. So there's all these studies that have been done about Japanese Americans and folks from Japan. Mm-hmm. And it's like the more you acculturate here, the less healthy you are. So like foreign-born Japanese folks have much better health outcomes than Japanese American folks here.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably the reverse for us, for Mexicans.
Why do you think that is, though?
My guess is that when I go to Mexico, and certainly where my family's from, one of the biggest crises that exists is poverty. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And folks are trying to make a living. They don't have money to get the appropriate, to get high quality food. And when they are so poor, they are looking for support, and it provides a huge opening for massive companies like a Coca-Cola to swoop in. Mm-hmm. And when a company like Coca-Cola comes, it gives you free products or says, I'm going to give you an opportunity for a job, I'm going to help you start your business, but you have to sell my products, you're entrapped. You need them.
Yeah. What needs to happen is that I feel like when folks do data reports, they don't disaggregate based off that either, right? So, when I look at a report and it says Asian Pacific Islander, it doesn't tell you what generation they are. It doesn't tell you, foreign born, born here, right? Like it doesn't disaggregate, right? So sometimes we're making these big guesses, like they're making these statements about our communities when you don't have the full picture, right? Because for the Japanese community, I mentioned that it's like, Japanese American versus Japanese born, right? That's different. And then what you just shared, right? If that was all in a report, I don't think I've ever seen a report that kind of broke it down to that.
Yeah.
Communities here that are overlooked, like Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, for sure. When you look at poverty and income, actually in LA County, the highest level of poverty is Tongan Americans, higher than every other racial ethnic group. Nobody knows that, right? And at the same time, you're looking at some of these Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. Globally, highest level of obesity, globally, and there's many different reasons for it, but you look at those things, highest level of poverty, really high numbers for obesity, diabetes, chronic diseases. But then what investments actually put towards those communities? Nothing, like very little to nothing, right? And I think it goes back to what we were talking about. This is a numbers game. People always say, like, what's the biggest bang for your buck, right? Am I going to target all this money for solutions for 0.8% of a population? Or will I translate stuff into the two most common things I know, which is Spanish and Chinese, and try to focus on those folks, right? I'm not saying don't focus on, Spanish speaking, Chinese speaking folks, but, when we're talking about equity and social justice, like what are we doing to solve these issues in these communities that need it the most? And so there has been this conversation I've heard where when researchers create reports and they do data, they share different race ethnicities. There are folks within Asia Pacific Islander communities who say, if you can't disaggregate our data, don't put us in at all. How do you feel when you hear that?
Oh man, that's hard, dude. I guess it's
because for them they're like, well, you're pushing different stereotypes, maybe giving a false narrative, so it's better to not have it at all.
And then if you don't include them at all, then you run the risk of truly being invisible, I guess, in that report.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'm not sure. I'm conflicted about it. I guess both, they have an interesting point that needs to be considered. I guess that the point there is that it should be done right.
Yeah.
Which I like to a certain extent. I guess I sympathize with that we should do excellent work. We shouldn't just do half-ass work.
A lot of the API community folks are struggling with. I think the middle ground has been putting something in there that said this data does not represent all API
Yeah.
communities. We couldn't get all the data, right? But still putting the data out there. But it's just kind of rough to have to even think this way, right?
It's terrible.
We're a society that's more and more about big data and understanding how to use data to help.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we do that when the data is incorrect, right? Or it's incomplete? I think within our construct right now is built around white supremacy, right? And I don't think it was meant to have so many different voices at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So we really have to rethink it in that way in order for us to make real change.